Hi guys, welcome to the very first video of Crystale where we will dive into some of the basic gameplay mechanics and what we've been cooking up so far. But first of all, a little bit of an introduction. My name is Neville and I'm responsible for general management within Crystale. And next to me
is Sergio, and I'm responsible for game mechanics and game design. And we're going to show you some game mechanics today.
great, and we're first going to jump into the deck selection, right? Tell us a little bit more about the decks.
Yes, so basically when you boot up the game, we have a deck selection where you get to pick about fire or wind. When we pick fire, for example, you get to see some information about the deck where you can see the summoner at the top and you can see 10 servants below that, followed by 20 spells. You can click on one of these crystals to basically get some information about what your content of your deck is, and you can also see some information about the summoner, which is at the center. There you can see that there are 5 spells that summoner can use, and we will be showcasing one of them today.
And that one is called Meteor. A little bit more about that later on, but now let's just boot up and let's find an opponent. As you can see, we're very much anime inspired based on the characters you see right now. This is Ragnis, and I believe Ragnis is one of the servants, right?
Yes, that is correct.
And we have a distinction between servants, summoners, and spells. Those are the 3 type of crystals for ease of understanding. It's the same as a card in a trading card game, right?
Yes.
Only we call it crystals.
Yeah.
And your deck must consist of at least 1 summoner, must consist of a maximum of 10 servants and 20 spells, right?
Correct.
Great.
Yes.
And they always have to be from the same element.
Correct. And there's also a limitation to how many spells of the same you can have, which is 4. So if you want to have, for example, Ignis, you can only have it 4 times, despite that you want to have them more. There's a rule that you can only have 4 of the same crystal in one deck.
Great. Cool. But before we can start the match, we have to determine who goes first. Why do we do that?
Basically, the player who goes first gets to start the game, and then the second player gets a small bonus to balance things out. So before we actually start, we have this rock, paper, scissors match to decide who goes first, and from there the game basically starts. The one who wins gets to go first, and the second one goes second, where that player also then gets a 20 mana as a startup to basically even things out during the match.
Great. So if I'm second, I lost rock, paper, scissors versus you. And let's say the maximum mana of my summoner is 100. I start with 120. Even if I don't use any MP, which is not a good idea.
Exactly.
But if I don't use it, I end my turn. The maximum mana goes back to 100 from 120, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Great. All right, let's start. So what are we seeing? It's a lot going on the field. Take us a little bit what we're seeing on the field in the left lower corner, in the right upper corner.
Yes, so basically when you boot up the game, you have this field divided into particular tiles. There are different symbols symbolizing the elements that we have in the game, and also representing the decks that will be coming up eventually. For now, we have fire and wind, but on the field you can also see elements like earth, lightning, ice, water, light, and darkness. From there, we can go to the bottom of the screen where you can see the hand panel, which are the crystals that are within your hand and you can use at that particular moment. And on the left bottom side, you see some information about your summoner. You have the mana, which is the yellow bar, your lives, which are represented by the hearts, and you can also set some information about the crystals in your hand and in your deck or pool in our game. The same also applies for the ones on the top. On the top right side, you see that same information about your opponent. Then from there, on the field itself, you also see a unit now placed on the far left and the far right side, which are the summoners of each deck. The one from our side is on the left, and on the opponent is on the right side. Then to actually play the game, we need to start the game by drawing a crystal. We press the draw button, which is displayed, and from there we can actually start the game on our side.
Great. And after I've drawn a card, I believe the card comes into my hand panel, and my hand panel consists of all the crystals I could play in my main phase, right?
Exactly.
Great. And is there a maximum of how many crystals I can have in my hand panel?
You do. So basically, you can have up to 9 crystals in your hand at the end of the turn. And once you've drawn a 9th crystal, you can have it until the end phase. So basically, you can have more crystals than 9 during the phase, but then at the end phase, you have to discard the excess amount of crystals that you have. There aren't that many ways to actually get more crystals in a turn, but there is a possibility if you either hoard them during your turn, or if you have certain crystals that let you draw extra.
Great, thanks. You spoke a little bit about the summoner itself, that it has some distinct features. What are the greatest distinctions between a summoner and a servant?
So basically, the servant are the units that the summoner needs to actually win. So the summoner is like the king piece, which we can refer to, and the goal of the game is to basically knock out your opponent's summoner. It has 3 lives, so basically it needs to take 3 hits to win the game. But in order to do that, you need servants to actually accomplish that. The summoner can't attack on itself, in and of itself, and therefore you need the servants to actually do the damage that you want to do to actually win the game.
Great.
From there, you also have to keep in mind that the summoner isn't there just to be there and present. It can also support the servants by using the spells which we discussed, and we will be discussing one of those abilities in this particular video as well.
Great. So we start this turn by drawing a card and summon one of those servants right next to my summoner, right? Because you're only restricted to summon a servant right next to your summoner. The only exception would be if that servant has some distinct features that it can be summoned somewhere else, right?
Exactly.
Great.
Right.
So I believe we summoned Ignis right in front on the Thunder Tile. What happens next? What can I do after I've summoned a servant? What can I do with this Ignis?
Yeah, so basically when you're in the main phase, you have a lot of different options that you can do. You can summon a servant, which we just displayed, and you can also move your units once they're on the field. With units, we basically mean the totality of the servants, summoners, and other types of units that are in the game. Right now we can display movement by moving Ignis towards the summoner, which we need to actually damage the opponent's summoner, and you can also move your summoner itself, so it doesn't necessarily have to stay on that particular corner of the field.
So if I understand correctly, I also have to strategize where I put my summoner, where it walks to, where I position my servants. The servant we just summoned, Ignis, was on a Thunder Tile. He's a fire servant, but if he's on a water tile, he also has some negative effects on him, right?
Exactly.
So it's also important where you are and what type of element tile you're on.
Exactly, and also that's something within the game mechanics where these particular tiles are randomized. So each time when you start a game, the amount of tiles with the elements are the same, but where they are always randomized. So for example, you can start on a fire tile in one match, and then in another match you start on a earth tile, for example, and that's always randomized for each particular game.
Great. And I believe Meteor is one of the effects that we will be showcasing later. And Meteor is also a good showcase on how you can strategize based on the elements upon the field. But before we dive into that, I want to talk a little bit more about the summoning. Is there any restriction on how many characters I can summon, or at least servants I can summon in a turn? And what are the restrictions for my servant?
Yeah, so servants can only be summoned once per turn, and there's also ability to sacrifice them for different means, which can also be done once per turn. The restrictions on the field is that there are only allowed to be 5 of them at the same time. So for example, if you have 5 servants already on the field, but you want to have a different servant with a different function, that's where the sacrifice function actually comes in, because you only have a limit of 5.
All right, great. So I believe we just moved around with Ignis. We took a step forward. As we can only summon one particular servant per turn, we can move 1 tile. I believe we did that, and now it's my enemy's turn.
Yeah.
In the meantime, as our enemy or opponent is doing certain actions, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the phases, as it is a strategic trading card game, but it's turn-based, right? So I start with my draw phase. What happens after?
So in the draw phase, we get a crystal and add it to your hand, and from there we go to the recharge phase. The recharge value is different for each summoner, and basically means the amount of mana that you get back at the start of your turn. For the fire summoner, that value is 65, and in a nutshell, the more initial mana a particular summoner has, the less mana it gets back every turn. From there, we move on to the main phase, and here you basically get to play the game. You get to summon servants, you get to move your units on the field, you get to use some of your spell cards, spell crystals, excuse me, which are in your hand. You also get to use your summoner abilities, and you also get to battle with your servants. There are also some different functions which we'll discuss in a different video, but for here we will showcase the summoner ability which we have been hyping up until this moment.
Great.
So basically,
I believe our opponent made his moves. He summoned just like us, Ignis on the field. He moved one tile forward, and it's now back to our turn. We drew another crystal. We regained some mana, and now it's our main phase. What are we going to do now?
Yeah, so basically we're going to showcase the ability and also display how a summoner can actually support the servants in their battle. So basically the Ignis has 50 health and 20 attack, and in this case the Ignis isn't capable of actually knocking out the opponent's Ignis, but by using Meteor, that's one of the summoner spells, we can actually make that happen. So basically by clicking the summoner, we get to see the information about the summoner as well as the 5 abilities that it has, and then by clicking on the Meteor you get to use that particular effect. Meteor allows you to click a tile on the field, then it will basically burst that particular tile as well as the surrounding tiles with an explosive power. It then deals 20 damage to every unit that's on those tiles from the opponent's side, and also burns them for some additional extra pain for the opponent. The burn status affliction will also be useful for Ignis, because from there it can use its secondary ability, which we'll go over right now. Once the Ignis moves over to the opponent, it is within striking distance, but as we discussed, it only has 20 attack. But Ignis has a secondary ability that it usually burns the opponent when it attacks, but when a unit is already burned, it will deal an additional 10 damage. And because of the meteor that we just used, the opponent is burned, and thus it only has 30 health with burned, causing Ignis to basically take him out. So by clicking the opponent's servant, we get to initiate a battle. We then confirm that particular battle, and then we can knock him out.
Great. The reason why we're confirming is that the opponent also has some options in the battle process. Not something that we'll discuss today, but I think the most important part, what you just discussed, is that you have to position yourself strategically, possibly turn the tiles into your favor, which can activate certain effects for your servants. But also keep in mind that a servant can have certain effects that can also positively resolve the outcome of a battle, right?
Exactly.
Great,
Yes.
sounds good. Well, let's keep it at this. I think we have discussed the basic mechanics. We've attacked, we've summoned, we went over the phases and the distinctions between the different crystals within our pool, because we
Yes.
don't call it a deck officially, it's a pool.
Exactly.
But just for all the old school trading card gamers to know what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right, great. Thanks, Aguilio, for this
Yes,
explanation.
thank you.
This was the very first explanation of Crystale the game, where we took you to some basic mechanics. Stay tuned for the waiting list to join our game in our demo, MVP, and alpha stage, but also for some preliminary sales. See you on the next tutorial, where we dive into a little bit more in-depth of the game mechanics. My name was Neville, this was Regilio, and we'll see you next time.
Till next time.
See ya!
Bye bye.